The distant whirring of environmental systems was the only sound that accompanied Captain Elias Vance as he walked through the curved corridors of Outpost Meridian. 15 years in diplomatic service had taught him that the sound of machinery was the same everywhere in the galaxy. Consistent, predictable, unlike the species that built them. His boots echoed against the metal flooring as he approached the main observation deck, datapad in hand, mentally preparing for another day of complex negotiations. Stationed at this frontier outpost on the edge of Xylan territory, Elias had grown accustomed to being the face of humanity in a place where humans were still somewhat of a novelty. The Xylan Alliance was young, barely 6 years old, and fragile enough that even minor misunderstandings could have diplomatic consequences, which was precisely why Elias, with his reputation for steady pragmatism and cultural sensitivity, had been selected for this assignment. He paused at the large viewport, allowing himself a moment to take in the view of Xylos below. From orbit, the planet was a mesmerizing swirl of deep purples and bright ceruleans, its atmosphere refracting light in ways that still amazed him despite having seen it dozens of times during his 3-month posting. Somewhere down there, in the capital city of Lyrit, representatives from both worlds were finalizing trade agreements that would strengthen the budding alliance between their species. Elias had grown somewhat cynical about interspecies relations after the Proxima incident, a diplomatic catastrophe that had nearly ended his career, but even he had to admit there was something genuinely promising about the relationship with the Xylans. Their society, with its unique telepathic resonance and reverence for spoken promises, was unlike any he'd encountered in his years of service. "Captain Vance," a voice called from behind him. "The delegation from Lyrit has requested your presence at the midday ceremony." Elias turned to find Lieutenant Morris, her uniform impeccably pressed as always. "Thank you, Lieutenant. Anything I should be prepared for?" "Just the usual ceremonial exchange, sir. The Xylan Minister of External Relations will be present, along with several of their cultural elders. The briefing is on your datapad." Elias nodded, scrolling through the information. The Xylans placed immense importance on ceremony, particularly those involving their naturally occurring resonance crystals. These formations, found only on their homeworld, were believed to capture and preserve spoken promises in what they called thought bonds. To the Xylans, words spoken near these crystals became unbreakable vows. "One more thing, sir," Morris added hesitantly. "There's been a request for you to visit one of the Xylan educational centers after the ceremony. Apparently, some of the younger Xylans are curious about humans." Elias suppressed a sigh. Cultural exchange was important, but he had hoped to review the trade proposals before tomorrow's meeting. Still, refusing would be impolitic. "Of course. Schedule it in." The shuttle ride to the surface was smooth, the descent through Xylo's atmosphere offering spectacular views of crystal formations that rose like jagged spires from the violet landscapes below. The landing pad was situated on the outskirts of Lyrit, where the architecture blended seamlessly with the natural environment, buildings that seemed to grow from the ground rather than being constructed upon it. A small, welcoming party awaited them, led by Minister Thara, a tall Xylan with skin that shifted between deep blue and purple depending on her emotional state. Like all her species, she had large, expressive eyes that seemed to capture more light than should be possible, giving them an almost luminous quality. "Captain Vance," she greeted him, her skin rippling with welcoming patterns of turquoise. "Your presence honors us." "The honor is mine, Minister," Elias replied with the formal bow that protocol dictated. "The Terran Confederacy values our growing friendship." The ceremony proceeded as expected. Formal exchanges of greetings, ritualistic acknowledgments of mutual respect, the presentation of symbolic gifts. Elias had performed such rituals countless times on dozens of worlds, and he executed his role flawlessly, mindful of every gesture and nuance that might be scrutinized by the cultural elders watching from their elevated seats. Afterward, as promised, he was escorted to one of Lyrit's educational centers, a dome-shaped building surrounded by gardens of crystal-like vegetation that chimed softly in the gentle breeze. Inside, Young Xylans gathered in small groups, their skin displaying excited flashes of yellow and green when they noticed the human visitor. "They are learning about the Terran Confederacy," his guide explained. "Your visit brings their lessons to life." Elias spent the next hour answering questions about Earth, human customs, and life. Among the stars, the young Xylans were refreshingly direct in their curiosity, lacking the diplomatic filters that often made interactions with adults of any species so tedious. As the session was concluding, a small Xylan child approached him hesitantly. Unlike the others, who had bombarded him with questions in groups, this one seemed content to observe from a distance. Her skin was a pale lavender, with subtle patterns that suggested deep concentration. "Hello there," Elias said, crouching down to her level. "Do you have a question for me?" The child's skin flickered with a pattern that his translator interpreted as mild embarrassment. "I am Lyra," she said finally, her voice musical in the way all Xylan voices were. "Why do humans travel so far from home?" Elias smiled. It was a profound question for one so young. "We're explorers by nature," he replied. "We've always wanted to know what's beyond the next hill, or the next ocean, or the next star. It's in our blood. Will you explore forever?" Lyra asked, her skin now showing patterns of genuine curiosity. "Until we've seen everything there is to see," Elias said with a gentle laugh. "Though that might take a very long time." Lyra considered this, her head tilting slightly. "And do you have a bond mate who waits for you among the stars?" The question caught him off guard. "No," he admitted. "Not yet. That is sad," Lyra declared with childlike frankness. "My mother says that having a bond mate is what makes the universe whole." "Your mother sounds very wise," Elias replied, amused by the child's concern. "When I grow big enough to touch the stars," Lyra announced suddenly, her skin pulsing with determination, "I will find a bond mate who explores like you." Something about her earnestness touched him. "Well," he said lightly, "when you're big enough to touch the stars, perhaps I'll come back and marry you myself." He hadn't noticed the small crystal formation near where they stood, one of the resonance crystals that the Xylans revered so deeply. But Lyra's eyes widened, and her skin flashed with a brilliant pattern of deep blues and purples that his translator couldn't interpret. Before he could ask what was wrong, one of the educational supervisors approached, ending their conversation. Elias was led away to meet with other groups, and soon after, it was time for him to return to the outpost. The encounter with the curious child was quickly forgotten among the many meetings and negotiations that filled his remaining days on Xylos. 2 weeks later, Elias was reassigned to the diplomatic corps at Arcturus Station, and his brief posting to the Xylan frontier became just another entry in his service record. The years that followed saw him rise through the ranks, his expertise in navigating the complex waters of interspecies diplomacy earning him both promotions and the grudging respect of his superiors. Personal connections, however, remained elusive, the demands of his career leaving little room for relationships that couldn't withstand long absences and the constant movement from one assignment to the next. By the time Elias reached the position of senior diplomatic attaché at Centauri Prime, the largest human diplomatic hub in the sector, he had largely resigned himself to a life defined by his service rather than personal attachments. At 43, with silver beginning to thread through his dark hair, he had become the consummate diplomat, respected, effective, and just detached enough to make the difficult decisions that sometimes came with the job. The morning that would change the course of his life began like any other. Elias was reviewing reports from various diplomatic missions in his spacious but utilitarian office when his assistant, Thomas, announced an unscheduled visitor. "A Xylan representative is requesting to see you, sir," Thomas said, looking somewhat perplexed. "She's not on the official delegation roster, but she's quite insistent that she needs to speak with you specifically." Elias frowned. The Xylan delegation wasn't due to arrive for another 3 days. "Did she give a name?" "Yes, sir." She identified herself as cultural attaché Lyra of House Thuran. The name stirred no immediate recognition. "Thuran, that's one of the leading houses on Xylos, isn't it?" "Yes, sir. Quite influential in their diplomatic council, according to our database." Elias sighed and closed the report he'd been reading. Very well, send her in. He stood as the door slid open, preparing to greet his visitor with the formal respect due a representative of an allied species. But the words died in his throat as the Xylan woman entered. She was tall, as most adult Xylans were, with the characteristic graceful bearing of her people. Her skin was a striking lavender shade that seemed to shimmer subtly in the office lighting, intricate patterns playing across its surface in a way that suggested both confidence and keen intelligence. But it was her eyes that gave Elias pause, large, luminous, and filled with an intensity that seemed to look through him rather than at him. "Captain Vance," she said, her voice carrying the same musical quality that all Xylans possessed, though hers seemed particularly melodious. "Though I should say senior attaché now, should I not? Time brings changes to us all." Elias nodded, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Please be seated. I apologize, but I don't believe we've met before." The Xylan's skin rippled with what his experienced I recognized as amusement. "But we have Elias Vance. Many cycles ago, on Xylos. I was much smaller then, and you were less distinguished." She gestured toward the silver in his hair. Elias searched his memory, trying to place her among the many Xylans he had met during his brief posting there. "I'm afraid you have the advantage of me. You visited an educational center in Lyrit," she prompted. "I asked why humans travel so far from home." Recognition dawned slowly. Lyra? The little girl from the educational center? Her skin flashed with pleasure at being remembered. "The very same, though no longer little, as you can see." "This is unexpected," Elias said carefully, studying her. The child he vaguely remembered had grown into a striking adult, her bearing suggesting education and status far beyond what he would have expected from a random child he'd met on a diplomatic visit. "What brings you to Centauri Prime, cultural attaché Lyra?" She leaned forward slightly, her gaze unwavering. "I have come to claim fulfillment of your word bond, Elias Vance." "My, what?" Confusion crossed his features. "Your promise," she clarified, her skin now pulsing with patterns that indicated seriousness. "You said that when I was big enough to touch the stars, you would return and take me as your bondmate." For a moment, Elias simply stared at her, certain he had misheard. Then fragments of memory returned. A curious child, a light-hearted joke about marriage when she grew up. I was just being kind to a child," he said finally. "It wasn't meant to be taken seriously." Lyra's skin darkened slightly. "It was spoken before a resonance crystal, Elias Vance. In our culture, such words are binding, especially when witnessed by the crystals that hold the memory of all promises." "But surely you understand that I had no idea of the significance," Elias protested, diplomatic training kicking in despite his shock. "In human culture, such comments to children are often just friendly banter. Cultural differences are precisely why I'm here as an attaché rather than simply appearing with my family to formalize the bond," Lyra replied calmly. "I understand that humans view such matters differently, but the fact remains that in Xylan terms, a promise was made and witnessed." Elias ran a hand through his hair, trying to gather his thoughts. "Lyra, I'm honored that you would remember a chance encounter from so many years ago, but what you're suggesting is, it's impossible. I can't marry someone I don't know based on a casual remark made a decade and a half ago." Her expression remained serene, but her skin betrayed a complex mix of emotions: disappointment, resolve, and something else he couldn't quite identify. "I anticipated resistance," she said, "which is why I've come prepared with this." She withdrew a small crystal from a pouch at her belt. It was no larger than her palm, but it glowed with an inner light that pulsed gently. "This is the memory crystal that witnessed your words. Among my people, it is irrefutable evidence of a promise made." Before Elias could respond, his comm unit chimed urgently. "Sir," Thomas's voice came through. "Director Callahan is requesting your immediate presence. He says it's regarding the Xylan situation." Elias frowned. The director wouldn't interrupt unless something significant had happened. "Tell him I'll be there shortly." He turned back to Lyra. I apologize, but duty calls. Perhaps we could continue this discussion later? Of course, she said, rising gracefully. The matters of state must take precedence. But the matter between us remains unresolved, Elias Vance. I will wait for your proper response. As she left, Elias found himself considering her words carefully. The logic was sound, and having a Xylan present during the recovery operation would indeed prevent later diplomatic complications. She has a point, he told Callahan. And cultural attaché Lyra has demonstrated considerable aptitude during our cultural exchanges. I believe her presence would be an asset. Callahan didn't look entirely convinced, but the urgency of the situation left little room for extended debate. Very well, but you're responsible for her safety, Vance. The pursuit vessel leaves in 30 minutes. Gather what you need and report to Docking Bay 7. As they hurried to prepare, Elias found himself in the unfamiliar position of worrying about someone other than himself on a mission. This could be dangerous, he told Lyra as they walked briskly toward his quarters so he could collect essential equipment. These thieves are professionals, likely armed and desperate. I'm not unfamiliar with risk, Lyra replied, her skin showing patterns of resolute calm. Before my diplomatic appointment, I served with the Xylan Exploratory Corps. We faced environmental hazards far more unpredictable than desperate mercenaries. Elias raised an eyebrow. You continue to surprise me. The Corps has a reputation for rigorous training, as does the Terran Diplomatic Security Service, she countered with a knowing look. I've reviewed your service record, Elias Vance. The Proxima incident wasn't merely a diplomatic crisis. You personally neutralized 3 armed insurgents while evacuating the ambassador. That information isn't in the public record, Elias noted, studying her with newfound interest. The understanding phase involves thorough research, Lyra replied, her skin showing a brief pattern that is experienced now identified as the Xylan equivalent of smile. I wish to know the man behind the diplomat. 30 minutes later, they boarded the pursuit vessel, a sleek, military-grade ship designed for speed and stealth rather than comfort. Captain Reza Hayes, a no-nonsense veteran of the Terran Space Force, briefed them as the ship disengaged from the station. We've tracked the target vessel to the asteroid mining zone in the outer system, she explained, bringing up a holographic display of their pursuit route. It's a modified cargo shuttle, fast, but not designed for extended journeys. Our analysts believe they're planning to rendezvous with a larger ship somewhere in this region. She indicated a cluster of asteroids dense enough to confuse standard sensors. How long until we reach them? Elias asked. Approximately 3 hours at maximum sustainable speed, Hayes replied. Enough time for you to familiarize yourselves with the tactical situation. The journey passed intense preparation. Elias and Lyra reviewed what was known about the stolen data crystals and their potential significance to the upcoming negotiations. The Orion Treaty would establish a protected trade corridor through a sector currently plagued by piracy and territorial disputes. Both the Terran Confederacy and the Xylan Alliance stood to benefit enormously, but other factions, including the powerful Orion Mining Consortium, had reason to prefer the status quo. The consortium profits from the current instability, Elias explained as they examined star charts of the disputed sector. They can charge premium rates for security escorts and hazard fees. And the information on those crystals could reveal exactly how our governments plan to secure and administer the corridor, Lyra added, her skin darkening with concern. If leaked to the right parties, it could allow them to develop effective countermeasures before implementation. Their discussion was interrupted by Captain Hayes. We're detecting the target vessel. They've docked with a larger ship at the edge of the asteroid field, just as intelligence suggested. The tactical display showed a medium-sized vessel with a configuration that Elias didn't immediately recognize. Can you identify the larger ship? He asked. Hayes frowned. It's running without identification transponders, but the configuration matches vessels used by the Terrace Security Collective. Mercenaries, Elias murmured. High-end ones. The collective doesn't come cheap, Hayes agreed. Someone's investing serious resources in this operation. What's our approach? Lyra asked, studying the tactical display with a critical eye that confirmed her earlier claims of experience. "We have the advantage of surprise for now," Hayes said. "I propose a stealth approach, using the asteroid field for cover. We can dock covertly and board before they realize we're here. And if they detect us?" Elias asked. "Then we shift to Plan B, disable their engines, and force a standoff." Hayes's expression was grim. But recovery of those data crystals intact becomes significantly less likely in that scenario. The plan was set. The pursuit vessel powered down to minimal operational levels and glided through the asteroid field using precision thrusters, its advanced stealth systems rendering it nearly invisible to standard sensors. Elias and Lyra joined the boarding team, 4 Terran security specialists equipped with non-lethal but effective weaponry. "Stay behind me," Elias told Lyra as they prepared at the airlock, checking the compact neural disruptor he'd been issued. "Your expertise with the crystals is essential, which means keeping you safe is the priority." Lyra's skin showed patterns of mild amusement. "I appreciate your concern, but remember that Xylan physiology offers certain advantages in combat situations. Our reaction time is approximately 1.3 times faster than the human average, and our skin can alter its light absorption properties for limited camouflage." As if to demonstrate, her lavender skin darkened to a deep charcoal gray that would blend perfectly with the ship's shadowed corridors. "Another surprise," Elias muttered, impressed despite himself. The docking was executed with precision, the pursuit vessel attaching to an auxiliary maintenance port on the larger ship's underside, a blind spot in most security systems. The boarding team moved swiftly through the airlock, led by Lieutenant Quan, the team's tactical specialist. Life signs indicate most of the crew is concentrated on the bridge and in the cargo bay, Quan reported quietly as they moved through dimly lit maintenance corridors. "Our target is likely the secure storage area on Deck 3. They encountered their first resistance at a security checkpoint. 2 mercenaries who barely had time to register surprise before Quan and his team neutralized them with neural disruptors. The unconscious guards were bound and secured in a storage closet. The ship's internal sensors will have registered the discharge," Quan warned. "Our window of surprise is closing." They moved more quickly now, reaching Deck 3 just as alarms began to sound throughout the vessel. The secure storage area was protected by a heavy door with both electronic and mechanical locks. "This will take time to bypass," one of the security team members said, examining the locking mechanism. "Time we don't have," Elias replied, noting the sounds of movement from nearby corridors. "Can we cut through?" Before anyone could answer, Lyra stepped forward, her skin shifting to a deep, resonant blue that seemed to pulse with energy. "The lock has crystalline components," she said. "I may be able to influence them." She placed her hands on the door near the locking mechanism, closing her eyes in concentration. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, almost imperceptibly, the crystalline components in the lock began to resonate, vibrating at frequencies that human ears could barely detect. With a soft click, the mechanisms disengaged, and the door slid open. "How did you?" Elias began, but was cut off by Lieutenant Quan. Security team approaching from both ends of the corridor. "We need to move now." The team hurried into the secure storage area, sealing the door behind them. Inside, they found a small room lined with containment units, one of which was open and active, housing several Xylan data crystals. "These are the stolen crystals," Lyra confirmed, examining them without touching. "They appear undamaged, but I'll need to verify their integrity." "Make it quick," Quan urged, positioning his team defensively. "They know we're here, and they'll have override codes for this door." Lyra carefully removed the crystals from the containment unit, placing them in a specialized carrier she'd brought for this purpose. As she worked, Elias heard the sound of someone attempting to override the door controls from outside. "Company's coming," Quan announced tersely. "Prepare for engagement." The door slid open to reveal 4 armed mercenaries, their weapons trained on the boarding team. But before either side could act, the ship lurched violently, throwing everyone off balance. "What the?" one of the mercenaries began, just as the ship's emergency klaxons began to wail. Captain Hayes's voice came through on their comm units. "Boarding team, be advised. A third vessel has entered the area and opened fire on the mercenary ship. Reading multiple impacts. Structural integrity of your current location is compromised. Evacuate immediately to extraction point Alpha." The sudden attack created momentary confusion that Quan's team exploited, neutralizing the disoriented mercenaries with coordinated disruptor fire. "Who's attacking?" Elias demanded as they secured the unconscious mercenaries. "Unknown vessel." Not responding to hails, Hayes replied. "Configuration suggests Orion Mining Consortium, but they're running without identifiers. They want to eliminate everyone who knows about the stolen data," Elias realized. "We need to move." The return journey through the now damaged ship was chaotic. Emergency lighting bathed the corridors in pulsing red, and the deck plates vibrated with the impact of continued weapons fire. Twice they encountered groups of panicked mercenaries, more concerned with their own escape than stopping the boarding team. They were halfway to the extraction point when a massive explosion rocked the ship, collapsing part of the corridor ahead of them. "Rerouting," Quan announced, checking a schematic on his wrist device. "This way." The alternative route took them through the ship's cargo bay, a massive space now in disarray as unsecured containers shifted with the vessel's erratic movements. They were crossing an elevated walkway when Elias noticed movement below, a group of figures hurrying toward an escape pod. "Bay." One figure looked up, spotting them. "There," he shouted. "They have the crystals." Weapons fire erupted toward their position, forcing them to take cover behind cargo containers. "Keep moving toward the extraction point," Quan ordered the rest of the team. "We'll cover you." Elias positioned himself next to Lyra, neural disruptor ready. "Stay low. When Quan gives the signal, we move to the next position of cover." But as the security team laid down suppressing fire, a stray shot hit a power conduit near Lyra's position. The resulting electrical surge temporarily overloaded the walkway's structural supports. With a groan of protesting metal, the section beneath Lyra gave way. Elias lunged for her, catching her arm as she began to fall. For a critical moment, they hung suspended, Elias anchored precariously to the remaining walkway, Lyra dangling above the cargo bay floor. The data crystal carrier slipped from her grasp, bouncing off container edges before landing on the deck below. "Let go," Lyra told him, her skin showing patterns of resolve. "The crystals are more important than either of us." "Not a chance," Elias grunted, muscles straining as he maintained his grip. With his free hand, he secured a handhold on the walkway frame. "Quan, need assistance here." But the security team was pinned down by continued fire from below. Elias realized that help wouldn't arrive in time. The strain on his arm was already becoming unbearable. "Lyra, I need you to climb up using me as a ladder," he instructed through gritted teeth. "Now!" With the extraordinary coordination he'd glimpsed earlier, Lyra began to move, using his body as a climbing surface until she could grasp the walkway edge herself. Together, they pulled her to safety just as another section of the walkway collapsed completely. "The crystals," she said immediately, her gaze fixed on the carrier now visible on the cargo bay floor. "I see them," Elias replied. He activated his comm. "Quan, we need to retrieve a package from the cargo bay floor before extraction." "Negative," came the immediate response. "Ship integrity is failing. Captain Hayes reports we have less than 10 minutes before catastrophic reactor containment failure." "Those crystals are the entire reason we're here," Elias insisted. "There's another way down," Lyra said, pointing to an emergency ladder at the far end of the remaining walkway. "We can retrieve the crystals and still reach the extraction point in time." Elias knew it was risky, but the mission objective was clear. "Quan, cultural attaché Lyra, and I will retrieve the package and meet you at extraction. Don't wait more than 7 minutes." "Understood," Quan replied, though his tone conveyed clear disapproval. 7 minutes, not a second more. The cargo bay was now largely empty of mercenaries, most having fled toward escape pods. Elias and Lyra descended the emergency ladder and sprinted across the open floor toward the fallen data carrier. They had just reached it when a figure stepped out from behind a cargo container, weapon raised. "I'll take that," the man said. He wore the insignia of a high-ranking officer in the Teray Security Collective. "The contents are worth far more than you realize." Elias shifted position, placing himself between the mercenary and Lyra. "You're on a ship that's about to experience a reactor breach. Whatever you're being paid, it's not worth your life." The man smiled thinly. "Who said anything about staying on the ship? My shuttle is prepped and waiting. Now hand over the carrier, or neither of you will leave this cargo bay alive." "You don't understand what's at stake," Lyra said, her voice calm despite the danger. "Those crystals contain information vital to establishing stability in the Orion sector." "Understand perfectly," the mercenary replied. "Stability means regulated trade routes, security patrols, and the end of profitable gray market operations. Some very powerful people prefer the current arrangement. The Orion Mining Consortium, Elias guessed. They hired you to steal the data, among others. Now enough talk. The carrier." Now, Elias assessed their options. The mercenary was positioned between them and the exit, his weapon trained steadily on Elias's chest. The neural disruptor at Elias's belt would be too slow to deploy before the mercenary could fire. But he'd forgotten about Lyra's capabilities. In a blur of movement almost too fast for human eyes to track, her skin shifted to deep shadow as she launched herself sideways, creating a momentary distraction that the mercenary couldn't ignore. As his weapon tracked toward her, Elias drew and fired his disruptor in one fluid motion, catching the mercenary in mid-turn. The man crumpled to the deck, unconscious. Elias quickly secured his weapon while Lyra retrieved the data carrier, checking the crystals inside. Intact, she confirmed with visible relief. The reinforced carrier protected them. "Good," Elias said, checking his chronometer. "Now we have 4 minutes to reach the extraction point before our ride leaves without us." They ran, navigating through increasingly unstable corridors as the ship's structural integrity continued to deteriorate. Emergency bulkheads had begun sealing automatically throughout the vessel, forcing them to find alternative routes. With less than a minute remaining, they finally reached the maintenance airlock where the pursuit vessel was docked. Lieutenant Quan was waiting, neural disruptor drawn. "Cutting it close," he said tersely as they rushed past him into the airlock. "Captain Hayes is preparing for immediate departure." The moment the airlock cycled, they felt the pursuit vessel disengage from the dying mercenary ship. Through a viewport, they watched as the larger vessel drifted, secondary explosions visible through its hull breaches. Moments later, a blinding flash signaled the final catastrophic failure of its reactor core. "The other attacking vessel?" Elias asked as they made their way to the bridge. "Disengaged when we did," Hayes informed them. "They're already at the edge of sensor range, heading out system." "They got what they wanted," Elias surmised. The mercenary ship destroyed, eliminating evidence and witnesses. "Not all witnesses," Lyra reminded him, holding up the data carrier. "We have what we came for." The return journey to Centauri Prime was considerably less tense than their outbound flight. Lyra spent much of the time examining the recovered data crystals, confirming their integrity and content. "They're all here," she told Elias as they sat in the ship's small mess area. "The treaty protocols, security arrangements, implementation timelines, everything the negotiating teams have developed over the past year. Does the data show any signs of having been accessed or copied?" Elias asked, conscious of the critical question that Director Callahan would certainly ask. Lyra's skin shifted through patterns of analysis before settling on a confident blue. "No, the crystal's integrity seals are intact. These particular storage devices create a permanent record when they're accessed. It's why they're used for our most sensitive diplomatic information. They were stolen, but not yet compromised." Elias felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "That's excellent news. The treaty negotiations can proceed as scheduled." "Because of you," Lyra said, her gaze direct and appreciative. "Your quick action on the walkway saved both me and the mission." And your distraction in the cargo bay saved us both, Elias countered. We make a surprisingly effective team. Is that so surprising? She asked, her skin shifting to a softer hue. The resonance crystal recognized a potential for harmony between us 15 years ago. Elias found himself without a ready response. The events of the past day had certainly challenged his initial skepticism about their compatibility. Working alongside Lyra had felt natural, their strengths complementing each other in ways he couldn't have anticipated. By the time they reached Centauri Prime, news of the recovery operation had preceded them. They were met at the docking bay by both Director Callahan and Minister Thera, whose relief was visible in the bright patterns playing across her skin. The Xylan Alliance owes you both a debt of gratitude, the minister said formally after confirming the safety of the data crystals. Your actions have preserved years of diplomatic work. Indeed, Callahan agreed. The timing couldn't have been more critical. The Orion Treaty delegations arrive tomorrow, and without these documents, we would have been negotiating from a severely compromised position. The debriefing was thorough but efficient. Elias and Lyra recounted the details of the operation, their encounter with the mercenary officer, and their conclusions about the likely involvement of the Orion Mining Consortium. We suspected they might take action, Callahan said grimly. But an operation of this complexity suggests they've developed more significant resources than our intelligence indicated. Or they've formed alliances with other interested parties, Minister Thera suggested. The Pures Coalition on Xylos has connections throughout the sector. It would not be beyond them to collaborate with human factions or mercenary groups if it served their agenda. We'll increase security for the treaty negotiations, Callahan decided. And I'll want both of you present during the proceedings, given your familiarity with the situation. After the debriefing, Elias and Lyra were finally released to rest and recover from their ordeal. As they walked toward the residential section of the diplomatic corridor, a comfortable silence settled between them. I've been considering, Lyra said eventually, that our understanding phase has taken an unexpected path. Few bondmates begin their relationship by facing death together. Elias smiled. I imagine it's not the standard approach in either of our cultures. They reached the junction where their paths would diverge, Lyra to her temporary quarters, Elias to his apartment. But neither moved to leave. Would you join me for a meal tomorrow, before the treaty delegations arrive? Elias asked, surprising himself with the spontaneity of the invitation. There's a viewing garden on the upper level that offers an excellent perspective of the station and the surrounding stars. Lyra's skin brightened with pleasure. I would enjoy that very much, Elias Vance. As she walked away, Elias found himself watching her departure with a growing awareness that something fundamental had shifted between them. The diplomatic obligation that had initially defined their relationship had transformed into something more genuine, a connection based on shared experience and mutual respect. The following day brought a whirlwind of activity as delegations from throughout the sector arrived for the Orion Treaty negotiations. Despite the increased security measures, the atmosphere was one of cautious optimism. The attempted theft of the treaty documents had, if anything, underscored the importance of establishing stability in the disputed corridor. Elias found moments throughout the day to observe Lyra as she fulfilled her duties as cultural attaché. She moved with confidence among the diverse representatives, her diplomatic skills evident in the way she navigated complex cultural interactions. Several times, she glanced in his direction, their eyes meeting briefly across crowded reception halls or conference rooms. By evening, both were ready for a respite from the diplomatic crush. They met as arranged at the viewing garden, a tranquil space designed to showcase the magnificence of space itself. One entire wall was a transparent barrier that offered an unobstructed view of the stars, while the garden itself contained plants from dozens of worlds, arranged to create a harmonious whole despite their diverse origins. This is remarkable, Lyra said as they walked along winding paths between flowering plants that glowed with bioluminescence. A perfect metaphor for what the treaty hopes to accomplish. Diverse elements finding balance together. I thought you might appreciate it, Elias replied. It's one of my favorite places on the station. a reminder of why the work we do matters. They found a secluded alcove with a small table overlooking the starfield. As they shared a meal of foods selected to be compatible with both their biologies, their conversation drifted from the day's events to more personal topics. "You mentioned the Proxima incident earlier," Lyra said. "It clearly had a significant impact on your career. Would you tell me more about it?" Elias was silent for a moment, considering. He rarely discussed Proxima, even with colleagues who had been involved. But with Lyra, the usual reluctance was absent. "It was meant to be a routine diplomatic exchange," he began. "A newly established colony seeking recognition from the Confederacy. I was part of the assessment team, junior enough to be assigned the preliminary cultural briefings rather than the actual negotiations." He paused, the memories still vivid despite the years that had passed. "What we didn't know was that the colony leaders had split into factions. The group that invited us represented only one perspective. Another faction saw our presence as foreign interference. They attacked during a formal reception, targeting the ambassador specifically. And you intervened," Lyra prompted gently when he fell silent. "I was closest when the shooting started," Elias said simply. "Training took over. I managed to neutralize 3 attackers and get the ambassador to safety, but not before several members of both delegations were killed. The colony's application for recognition was suspended indefinitely afterward. You blame yourself for the failure of the diplomatic mission," Lyra observed, her skin showing patterns of compassion. "I was assigned to cultural assessment," Elias replied. "I should have identified the factional conflict, understood the potential for violence. Instead, I accepted the surface narrative presented by our hosts. We cannot always see beneath the surfaces others present to us," Lyra said. "Even Xylans, with our ability to read emotional patterns and skin changes, can be deceived by those skilled in controlling such signals." "Perhaps," Elias conceded, "but the experience taught me to be more thorough, more skeptical, particularly about seemingly straightforward situations." "Is that skepticism why you initially resisted the idea of our word bond?" Lyra asked directly. Elias considered the question. "Partly," he admitted, "but it was more than that. The idea that a casual comment made to a child could become a binding commitment seemed arbitrary. Yet here we are," Lyra observed, gesturing to encompass their surroundings and the evening they were sharing. "Despite your skepticism, here we are," Elias agreed, studying her across the table. The soft lighting of the garden played beautifully across her lavender skin, highlighting the subtle patterns that expressed her emotions more eloquently than words ever could. "I find myself surprisingly content with that fact." Lyra's skin brightened with pleasure. "As do I," Elias Vance. Their evening extended longer than either had intended, the conversation flowing easily between topics both profound and mundane. When they finally parted outside Lyra's quarters, there was a moment of hesitation, a recognition of something developing between them that transcended diplomatic obligation or cultural accommodation. "Rest well," Elias said finally. "Tomorrow promises to be demanding." "For both of us," Lyra agreed. "But I find I look forward to facing those demands together." The treaty negotiations proceeded over the following weeks with the expected complexity of any major interstellar agreement. Representatives from a dozen worlds debated the fine points of trade regulations, security protocols, and governance structures for the proposed corridor. Elias and Lyra found themselves frequently called upon to provide insights, their recent experience with the theft attempt having elevated their status among the delegations. During this period, they continued to spend much of their free time together, their understanding phase evolving into a genuine exploration of compatibility and connection. Elias introduced Lyra to human art forms and cuisine, while she shared aspects of Xylan culture that went far beyond what was covered in diplomatic briefings. One evening, after a particularly intense negotiation session, they retreated to Elias's apartment for a quiet meal away from the constant scrutiny of diplomatic functions. As they relaxed afterward, Lyra produced a small crystal from a pouch at her belt, different from the one that had recorded his childhood promise. "What's this?" Elias asked, as she placed it on the table between them. A personal resonance crystal, Lyra explained. Unlike the public recording crystals used in ceremonies or diplomatic settings, these are for private reflections. They capture moments of particular significance to the individual. And this one captured something significant to you? Elias asked, curious. Lyra's skin shifted to a deeper purple that he had come to recognize as an expression of emotional intimacy. It contains our memories of our time together, from our first meeting years ago to more recent experiences. She gently pushed the crystal toward him. I would like to share these memories with you, if you are willing. Elias hesitated only briefly before placing his hand on the crystal as she had shown him previously. Immediately, he was immersed in Lyra's memories, but from her perspective, filtered through her sensory experience and emotional responses. He saw himself through a child's eyes, tall and fascinating in his difference, felt the wonder and curiosity that had prompted her questions, experienced the moment when his casual promise had registered on a level beyond conscious understanding, a resonance that had stayed with her through the years. Then the memories shifted forward in time. He felt her nervousness and determination as she prepared to meet him again as an adult. Saw himself through her eyes, older, more reserved, yet still radiating the same underlying warmth she had sensed as a child. Experienced her mingled hope and uncertainty as the understanding phase began. Most striking were the recent memories, their conversations in the botanical gardens, their collaboration during the crystal recovery mission, quiet dinners, and walks through the station. Through Lyra's perception, he saw a gradual transformation in himself, a softening of the diplomatic reserve, an emergence of genuine connection and joy in their shared experiences. When the memories faded, he found himself looking into Lyra's eyes, understanding her in a way that transcended words or conventional human interaction. The barriers he had maintained for years, the professional distance, the emotional caution, suddenly seemed arbitrary and unnecessary. Lyra, he began, then paused, searching for the right words. I've been thinking about our understanding phase. It's nearly complete according to the timeline Director Callahan negotiated. Her skin showed a pattern of attentive waiting, neither encouraging nor discouraging. When this began, he continued, I saw it as a diplomatic obligation, a situation to be managed to avoid offense. I never expected. He gestured between them, searching for words to describe the transformation. Nor did I, Lyra admitted, her skin showing complex patterns of emotion. I came seeking the fulfillment of a word bond, believing in the resonance the crystal had recorded. But I expected to find a diplomatic accommodation at best, not a true connection. And now, Elias asked, the question hanging between them. Now I find myself hoping that what began as obligation might continue by choice, she said simply. The treaty negotiations were nearing completion, the complex document taking final shape after weeks of careful deliberation. Security had been maintained throughout, though intelligence reports suggested the Orion Mining Consortium and its allies remained actively opposed to the agreement. The formal signing ceremony was scheduled for the following day, a momentous occasion that would establish a new era of cooperation and stability in the sector. That evening, a reception was held for all delegation members. The Grand Hall of Centauri Prime's diplomatic quarter had been transformed for the occasion, with representations of all participating cultures incorporated into the decorations. The atmosphere was one of accomplished purpose and cautious celebration. Elias and Lyra arrived separately, but soon found themselves gravitating toward each other, as had become their habit at such functions. They had just engaged in conversation with a representative from the Rigelian Assembly when Elias noticed a disturbance near the main entrance. A group of security personnel had surrounded someone, their postures tense. Director Callahan was approaching rapidly from across the room, his expression grave. Something's wrong, Elias murmured to Lyra. Stay here. I'll investigate. He made his way through the crowd, reaching Callahan just as the director received a report from the security team. What's happening? Elias asked quietly. Callahan's expression was grim. We've intercepted an operative attempting to access the environmental control systems. Initial questioning suggests they were planning to release a paralytic agent during the signing ceremony tomorrow. The consortium again? It appears so, though this operative is more forthcoming than most. Claims to be working for a coalition of interests, the consortium, the Purist Coalition, and elements of the terrorist supremacy movement. Just as Callahan finished speaking, Elias felt a prickle of warning at the back of his neck. Years of diplomatic service in high-risk environments had honed his instincts. He turned, scanning the crowd, and spotted a server moving with too much purpose, hand reaching inside their uniform jacket. "Director, down!" Elias shouted, lunging forward to push Callahan away from the approaching threat. In the same moment, he saw Lyra moving with extraordinary speed from across the room, having evidently sensed the same danger. The server, clearly no server at all, drew a small device from within their jacket. But before they could activate it, Lyra reached them, her hand closing around their wrist with Xylan strength. The device clattered to the floor as security personnel converged on the scene. Within moments, the situation was contained. The would-be attacker was secured, and the device, a localized disruptor field generator capable of disabling security systems, was safely deactivated. The reception continued, though with a noticeably heightened security presence. "Quick thinking, both of you," Callahan said when the immediate crisis had passed. "Intelligence suggests this was a desperate final attempt to derail the treaty. With the signing scheduled for tomorrow, they're running out of options. We should still increase security for the ceremony," Elias advised. "If they were willing to act this openly, they may have other operatives in place." "Already done," Callahan assured him. "No one enters the signing chamber tomorrow without triple verification." As the evening continued, Elias found himself watching Lyra with a new appreciation. The way she had instantly recognized the threat and acted without hesitation spoke to both her training and her character. When their eyes met across the room, he saw that she was similarly assessing him. Later, as they walked together through the quieter corridors of the diplomatic quarter, Elias finally voiced the decision he had been considering for days. "Our understanding phase officially ends tomorrow," he said. "After the treaty signing, you'll be expected to return to Xylos with the delegation unless other arrangements are made." Lyra stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "What arrangements would you suggest, Elias Vance?" He took a deep breath. "I find that I've grown rather attached to our cultural exchanges. It would be a shame to end them just as they're becoming truly interesting." A pattern of amusement rippled across her skin. "That is a very diplomatic way of expressing yourself." "Old habits," Elias admitted with a small smile. "What I'm trying to say is, I would like you to stay, not because of a word bond or diplomatic obligation, but because I've discovered that I prefer a life that includes you in it." Lyra's skin brightened with a glow that needed no translation. "I have reached a similar conclusion," she said softly. The resonance crystal sensed a truth neither of us could have recognized at the time. What began as a misunderstanding has become something I value beyond measure. "Then you'll stay?" "I will need to discuss extended diplomatic posting with Minister Thara," Lyra said practically. "But as my aunt and the senior Xylan representative, I believe she will be supportive. She has observed our developing bond with approval." The signing ceremony the following day proceeded without incident, the enhanced security measures proving effective deterrents to any further disruption attempts. Representatives from all participating worlds affixed their signatures or equivalent acknowledgments to the treaty, establishing the Orion Corridor as a protected zone of cooperation and shared prosperity. For Elias, however, the most significant moment came after the formal proceedings. Minister Thara approached him while Lyra was engaged in conversation with other delegation members. "Senior Attaché Vance," she greeted him, her skin showing patterns of formal respect. "The Xylan Alliance appreciates your contributions to both the security of our confidential information and the successful completion of the treaty." "I merely did my duty, Minister," Elias replied with appropriate modesty. "Indeed, Her skin shifted to show patterns that Elias now recognized as knowing amusement. I understand that you and my niece have formed a connection that transcends diplomatic obligation. She has requested an extended posting to Centauri Prime, which I am inclined to approve. I would be grateful for your support in that matter, Elias said carefully. It is already done, Thera informed him. Lyra will remain as our permanent cultural attaché to the Terran Confederacy. Her unique understanding of both our cultures makes her ideally suited for the role. She paused, her skin showing a more personal pattern, and her happiness is not insignificant to me. I have observed how she flourishes in your company, Elias Vance. Before Elias could respond, Thera continued. In our culture, when a word bond evolves from obligation choice, it becomes something far more profound, a thought bond freely given. Such bonds are considered the most sacred among our people. I'm beginning to understand the wisdom in your cultural perspectives, Elias admitted. As Lyra has come to appreciate certain human perspectives, Thera replied. Perhaps that is the true purpose of diplomatic exchange. Not merely formal agreements, but genuine understanding between different ways of being. With that philosophical observation, she departed, leaving Elias to contemplate how dramatically his life had changed in the weeks since Lyra had appeared in his office with her unexpected claim. The formal conclusion of the treaty proceedings brought a natural moment of transition. Many of the delegations departed for their home worlds, while others remained to begin the practical implementation of the agreement. For Elias and Lyra, it marked the end of their mandated understanding phase and the beginning of something chosen rather than imposed. They celebrated privately that evening in the viewing garden where they had shared so many meaningful conversations. The stars beyond the transparent barrier seemed particularly brilliant, as if acknowledging the significance of the moment. I've been thinking about what happens next, Elias said as they sat side by side, gazing out at the stellar panorama. As have I, Lyra replied, her skin showing thoughtful patterns. In Xylan tradition, the conclusion of the understanding phase would typically lead to a formal bonding ceremony. But our situation is hardly typical. No, Elias agreed with a smile. Very little about our relationship has followed convention, but perhaps that's appropriate. We're creating something new, a connection between different worlds and ways of being. What would such a connection look like to you? Lyra asked, her direct gaze meeting his. Elias considered the question carefully. I envision something that honors both our traditions while creating space for something uniquely our own. Not the fulfillment of an accidental promise, but the beginning of an intentional journey together. Lyra's skin glowed with a warmth that had become precious to him. That vision resonates deeply with me, Elias Vance. Among my people, the thought bond ceremony can take many forms adapted to the individuals involved. It need not follow rigid tradition when the circumstances are extraordinary. Then perhaps we should design our own ceremony, Elias suggested. One that represents who we are and what we hope to become together. The preparation for their bonding ceremony became a diplomatic event in itself, with representatives from both the Terran Confederacy and the Xylan Alliance offering suggestions and support. What had begun as a potential diplomatic incident had transformed into an opportunity to showcase the potential for meaningful connection between their species. Director Callahan, for his part, seemed almost smug about the outcome. I had a feeling this might happen, he confided to Elias during the preparations. From the moment I heard about that childhood promise, something told me you two might actually be compatible. The diplomatic corps could use more cross-cultural relationships, helps humanize the whole process. The ceremony took place 3 months after the treaty signing, in the grand central atrium of Centauri Prime's diplomatic quarter. The space had been transformed with elements from both worlds. Crystal formations from xylos arranged in harmonious patterns around traditional Terran symbols of unity and commitment. Representatives from a dozen worlds attended, along with close colleagues and friends from both their professional circles. Elias wore formal Terran diplomatic attire, modified to incorporate color patterns that held significance in Xylan culture. Lyra appeared in traditional Xylan ceremonial garments that had been adapted to include subtle motifs from Earth's cultural heritage. Minister Thara presided over the Xylan portions of the ceremony, while Director Callahan represented the Terran tradition. Together, they guided Elias and Lyra through a ritual that drew from both cultures while creating something new and distinctive. The most powerful moment came when they exchanged personal resonance crystals, Lyra's containing her memories of their journey together, and a newly created one that Elias had commissioned, containing his own perspective on their unique path from misunderstanding to genuine connection. As they held the crystals together, the resonance between them created a harmonic pattern that rippled through the atrium, visible in the way the light played through the crystalline structures surrounding them. To the Xylan attendees, this was a profound confirmation of the rightness of their bond. To the human observers, it was a beautiful, if not fully understood phenomenon that nonetheless conveyed deep significance. What began as a misunderstood promise has become a chosen commitment, Elias said, speaking the words they had crafted together. I stand before you not because of obligation, but because I have discovered in you a connection I never expected to find. I offer this bond freely, with full awareness of its meaning and depth. The resonance that brought us together has been proven true through experience and choice, Lyra responded, her skin glowing with emotion that needed no translation. I accept your bond and offer my own, not because of ancient words captured in crystal, but because of the harmony we have found together. May our connection bridge worlds and create new possibilities for understanding. The formal reception that followed was a celebration not just of their personal commitment, but of the broader significance it represented, a tangible embodiment of the cooperation and mutual respect that the Orion Treaty sought to establish throughout the sector. As the evening drew to a close, Elias and Lyra found a moment of privacy on one of the station's observation decks, gazing out at the stars that had once seemed to separate their worlds but now connected them. I never imagined a casual comment to a curious child would lead to this, Elias said, his arm around Lyra as they watched distant suns glimmer in the darkness. Perhaps some words carry truth beyond our knowing, Lyra replied, her skin showing patterns of contentment and joy. Or perhaps we simply recognized in each other something worth crossing the stars to find. Either way, Elias said, I'm grateful for that day in the educational center on Xylos, and for your determination to hold me to a promise I didn't know I wanted to keep. Lyra's skin rippled with amusement. And I am grateful that you were willing to see beyond cultural differences and diplomatic obligations to the possibility they concealed. Together, they watched as a ship departed the station, its engines flaring briefly before it disappeared into the vastness of space. In its wake, countless stars beckoned, each a potential world with its own unique perspectives and possibilities. What's next for us? Elias asked, though he already knew they had discussed various possibilities. Continued diplomatic service together, perhaps a joint assignment to a new sector, or even time on each other's homeworlds. The stars, Lyra said simply, echoing his words from their first meeting. We'll explore them together, creating connections where none existed before. Elias smiled, recognizing the perfect symmetry of her answer. Until we've seen everything there is to see. Though that might take a very long time, Lyra completed the echo, her skin glowing with the promise of shared tomorrows. And in that moment, standing at the threshold of their shared future, they both knew that the journey ahead, with all its inevitable challenges and discoveries, would be all the more meaningful for being traveled together. What had begun with a human's joking promise to a little alien girl had transformed into something neither could have imagined. A bridge between worlds, a testament to the power of understanding, and a love that proves some connections truly were written in the stars. D himself staring at the door, still trying to process the surreal encounter. A childhood promise, taken as a binding vow? It seemed absurd, yet the conviction in Lyra's eyes suggested that, at least for her, this was deadly serious. Director Callahan's office was on the top level of the diplomatic complex, offering a panoramic view of Centauri Prime's gleaming spires. But the man himself was not admiring the view when Elias entered. He was pacing, a datapad in hand, and a deeply troubled expression on his face. Vance, good, he said without preamble. We have a situation with the Xylans. If this is about cultural attaché Lyra, she just left my office, Elias began. Callahan stopped pacing. So you've already met her. Good. Then you're aware of the unique circumstances. Elias stared at him. You know about this word bond business? We received a formal diplomatic communique from the Xylan High Council 3 days ago, Callahan said, handing Elias the datapad. They've informed us that a member of one of their most influential houses is here to claim a promise made by a Terran Confederacy representative, you. Elias scanned the document, disbelief growing with each line. This can't be serious. It was a throwaway comment to a child. The Xylans don't do throwaway comments, Vance. Especially not when they're recorded by those damn crystals of theirs. Callahan sighed heavily, and especially not when the child in question turns out to be the niece of the current Xylan Minister of External Relations. What? Elias looked up sharply. Minister Thera? She's related to Lyra. Thuran is their house name. Minister Thera is her maternal aunt and, apparently, quite determined to see this word bond honored. Elias felt a headache forming. Director, with all due respect, I cannot marry a woman I barely know because of a misunderstood joke. There must be a diplomatic way to resolve this without causing a major diplomatic incident with a species whose alliance we've spent years cultivating. Callahan interrupted. I'm open to suggestions. Surely they can't expect. They expect their cultural practices to be respected, Callahan said firmly. Just as we expect ours to be. The timing couldn't be worse, with the Orion Treaty negotiations starting next week. The Xylans are key to securing that corridor. Elias paced the length of the office, mind racing. There must be a way out of this that doesn't involve either personal capitulation or diplomatic disaster. Callahan was silent for a moment, studying him. There might be. The Xylans have a cultural practice called the understanding phase. It's typically a period before formal bonding where both parties spend time together to ensure compatibility. A courtship period, Elias translated. Essentially, I've suggested to Minister Thera that given the unusual circumstances, an extended understanding phase would be appropriate. She's agreed, somewhat reluctantly. How extended? 3 months. During which time you, in cultural attaché Lyra, would be expected to participate in various cultural exchanges, diplomatic functions, and, well, get to know each other. Elias pinched the bridge of his nose. And at the end of these 3 months, a decision would be expected. Callahan's expression was sympathetic but firm. I don't have to tell you how important the Xylan Alliance is, Vance. Their crystalline technology alone has revolutionized our communication systems, and there's talk of them sharing their atmospheric manipulation techniques, which could transform terraforming. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on Elias's shoulders. His personal discomfort against interstellar relations that affected billions. It wasn't really a choice at all. Understand, Director. I'll make the best of this understanding phase. Good man, Callahan said, visibly relieved. Cultural attaché Lyra has been assigned quarters in the diplomatic wing. I suggest you begin by inviting her to dinner this evening. Show her that humans take this situation seriously, even if our understanding of it differs from theirs. As Elias left the director's office, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had suddenly veered wildly off course. A casual comment made to a child 15 years ago now threatened to reshape his entire future. The absurdity of it would be comical if the stakes weren't so high. But as he sent a formal dinner invitation to Lyra's quarters, he reminded himself that he had navigated more complex diplomatic waters before. This was just another challenge, albeit one with unusually personal implications. Dinner was arranged in one of the private dining rooms reserved for diplomatic functions. Elias arrived early, selecting a neutral ambience program that would be comfortable for both human and Xylan sensibilities. Soft lighting that complemented Xylan color perception, ambient sounds that mimicked the gentle chiming of Xylo's crystal forests, and temperature adjusted to the slightly warmer preference of Xylan physiology. Lyra arrived precisely on time, dressed in what Elias recognized as formal Xylan attire. flowing garments of a material that seemed to capture and reflect light in subtly shifting patterns, complementing the natural color changes of her skin. The effect was mesmerizing. "Thank you for accepting my invitation," Elias said, offering the traditional Xylan greeting gesture, palms forward, fingers splayed. Lyra returned the gesture, her skin rippling with what appeared to be appreciation. "I'm pleased by your willingness to begin the understanding phase," she replied. Many humans might have responded with rejection or anger when faced with such unexpected obligations. "Diplomacy is about finding common ground," Elias said, gesturing toward the table. "And before we can address the situation between us, I think we need to establish some of that ground." Over a meal carefully selected to accommodate both their biologies, Elias learned more about the woman Lyra had become. After their brief encounter years ago, she had pursued studies in xenolinguistics and cultural anthropology, developing a particular interest in human societies. Her appointment as cultural attaché had been recent, a position created specifically to deepen understanding between their species. "You've built your career around understanding humans," Elias observed. "Was that because of our meeting?" Lyra's skin shifted to a thoughtful blue. "It was a catalyst," she admitted. "Your words about exploration resonated with me. Xylans are typically more rooted. Our connection to our world and its crystals creates a certain insularity. I wanted to understand what drives humans to constantly seek what lies beyond. And have you found an answer?" "Many answers, but no single explanation. Your species contains multitudes of motivations." Her gaze met his. "But I notice you have built your career around understanding others as well. Are we so different in that regard?" The observation gave him pause. "Perhaps not," he acknowledged, "though my path was more about necessity than fascination. Understanding prevents conflict." "An admirable goal," Lyra said. "But is understanding without connection truly sufficient? You have spent your life learning about other species, yet you mentioned earlier having no bondmate, no anchor in the vastness you traverse." The personal question would have seemed intrusive from anyone else, but there was something in Lyra's direct approach that disarmed his usual deflections. "My work has made traditional relationships challenging," he said finally. "Few partners understand the demands of constant relocation, the delicate nature of diplomatic work, the need to sometimes place duty above personal considerations. Yet such understanding would be precisely what a bondmate from diplomatic circles might offer," Lyra pointed out. "Someone who shares your path among the stars." Elias studied her for a moment. "Is that why you've pursued this word bond after all these years? To find someone who understands your chosen path?" "That is part of it," she admitted, her skin shifting to a deeper purple. "But there is more. The resonance crystals do not simply record promises, Elias. They respond to deeper truths, connections that exist beyond conscious recognition. When you spoke those words, even in jest, the crystal resonated. Such resonance is rare between different species. You're suggesting some kind of predestined connection?" Elias couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. "I'm suggesting that words spoken near resonance crystals reveal truths we ourselves may not yet perceive," Lyra replied calmly. "The understanding phase exists precisely to explore whether such resonance reflects genuine compatibility or merely momentary harmony." The conversation shifted to lighter topics as the meal progressed, but Elias found himself increasingly intrigued by Lyra's perspective and intelligence. She possessed a keen insight into both Xylan and human cultures, often drawing connections that he, despite years of diplomatic training, had never considered. By the end of the evening, he found himself suggesting a tour of Centauri Prime's famous botanical gardens the following day, an offer made out of genuine interest rather than mere diplomatic obligation. "I would enjoy that," Lyra said, her skin glowing with a soft, pleasant luminescence. "Perhaps in exchange, I might introduce you to some Xylan customs that were likely not included in your diplomatic briefings." "That seems fair," Elias agreed, finding himself oddly anticipating their next meeting. The days that followed established a pattern. Mornings were devoted to their respective duties. Elias managing the complex web of diplomatic relations at Centauri Prime, Lyra engaging with various cultural and scientific exchanges as part of the Xylan delegation. Afternoons and evenings they spent together, alternating between human and Xylan contexts. Elias showed her the architectural wonders of the station, the bustling markets where dozens of species traded goods and stories, the quiet observation decks where the vastness of space reminded visitors of their place in the universe. Lyra introduced him to Xylan meditation practices, the subtle art of skin pattern communication that went beyond what translation devices could capture, and the complex harmonies of crystal music that required special instruments to produce sounds that resonated with Xylan physiology. 2 weeks into this arrangement, during a visit to a simulation chamber programmed to recreate a Xylan crystal forest, Elias found himself genuinely enjoying Lyra's company. They sat on a ridge overlooking a valley of crystalline formations that chimed softly in the simulated breeze, the light refracting through them to create ever-changing patterns across the landscape. In reality, the crystals would be responding to our presence, Lyra explained. They're semi-sentient in a way that's difficult to translate. Not conscious as you or I are, but aware in their own fashion. Like Earth's old-growth forests, Elias mused. There's evidence they communicate through root systems and chemical signals in ways we're still trying to fully understand. Exactly, Lyra said, her skin brightening with pleasure at his understanding. The resonance crystals are simply more immediate in their response. They capture emotional and verbal exchanges, preserving them in a form that can be accessed later. Like organic recording devices, Elias suggested. That's a simplification, but not entirely inaccurate. She hesitated, then added, "Would you like to see your promise as the crystal preserved it?" Elias tensed slightly. He had almost forgotten the reason for their initial connection amid the genuine rapport they had developed. Yes, I suppose that would help me understand." Lyra withdrew the small crystal she had shown him during their first meeting. "Place your hand on it," she instructed. "The resonance will be clearer with direct contact." Somewhat hesitantly, Elias extended his hand. The crystal was warm to the touch, pulsing gently against his palm. For a moment, nothing happened. Then suddenly he was experiencing a memory, not just seeing or hearing it, but feeling it as if he were there again. The educational center on Xylos. The curious child with lavender skin. His own voice, tinged with kindness and amusement. "When you're big enough to touch the stars, perhaps I'll come back and marry you myself." But there was more than just the words. The crystal somehow captured the emotional context, his genuine affection for the child's earnestness, the warmth of the moment, and something else, a strange sense of rightness that he hadn't consciously registered at the time. When the memory faded, he found himself staring at Lyra, unsettled by the experience. That was intense. "That is why word bonds are taken so seriously among my people," she explained gently. "The crystals capture not just what is said, but the truth behind the words." But it was still just a kind comment to a child, Elias insisted, though with less conviction than before. "I meant it to make you happy in the moment, not as a binding promise." "Intent matters," Lyra acknowledged, "which is precisely why we are in the understanding phase, rather than proceeding directly to a formal bonding. I do not wish to hold you to a promise you made without full awareness of its implications." "Then what do you want, Lyra?" Elias asked directly. Her skin shifted through several complex patterns before settling on a deep, resonant blue. "I want the opportunity to discover whether the resonance the crystal detected was merely momentary or something more enduring. I want to know if the connection I felt then, and continue to feel now, is mutual in any measure." The honesty of her answer struck him. There was no manipulation here, no diplomatic maneuvering, just a straightforward desire to explore a possibility. It was refreshingly direct in a world where Elias was accustomed to navigating layers of meaning and hidden agendas. "That seems reasonable," he said finally. "And I admit, I've enjoyed our time together these past weeks more than I anticipated." Her skin brightened visibly. "As have I," Elias Vance. The moment was interrupted by an urgent chime from Elias's communicator. "Vance here," he answered, noting the emergency protocol in the signal. "Sir, there's been an incident at the Xylan delegation quarters." Thomas's voice came through, tense with concern. "Minister Thara is requesting your immediate presence, specifically with cultural attaché Lyra." Elias and Lyra exchanged alarmed glances. "We're on our way," he replied, already rising to his feet. "What kind of incident?" "Some kind of break-in, sir. Security is on scene, but details are still coming in." The simulation dissolved around them as Elias overrode the program, returning the chamber to its neutral state. "We need to hurry," he told Lyra, whose skin had darkened with concern. When they arrived at the Xylan diplomatic quarters, they found security personnel from both species coordinating an investigation. Minister Thara was speaking with the head of station security, her skin flickering with patterns that indicated both anger and concern. "Aunt," Lyra called as they approached, slipping into her native language. Minister Thara turned, relief visible in her expression. "Lyra, good. I fear they might have targeted you as well." "What happened?" Elias asked, addressing both women. "Someone breached our secure communications hub," Minister Thara explained, switching back to the trade language for Elias's benefit. "Several data crystals were stolen, including ones containing sensitive information about the upcoming Orion Treaty negotiations." "Was anyone hurt?" Lyra asked. "Two of our security staff were rendered unconscious with some kind of neural disruptor. They're being treated now." The minister's skin darkened with concern. "But the most troubling aspect is that the intruder knew exactly where to find the crystals and how to handle them without triggering the standard security measures. This suggests inside knowledge, or someone with extensive experience with Xylan security protocols," Elias observed grimly. "Have you informed Director Callahan?" "He's on his way," confirmed the human security chief. "In the meantime, we're reviewing surveillance records and securing the remaining sensitive areas." Minister Thara's gaze shifted between Elias and Lyra. "Cultural attaché, given the circumstances, I believe it would be prudent for you to relocate temporarily. If someone is targeting Xylan officials, you may be at risk. She can stay in the secure, diplomatic guest quarters near my residence," Elias offered immediately. "They have enhanced security protocols, and I can arrange for additional measures." The minister's skin showed a pattern of consideration. "That would be acceptable, provided proper chaperones are assigned in accordance with understanding phase protocols." Elias nodded, familiar enough with Xylan customs by now to understand the requirement. "Of course, I'll make the arrangements immediately." As security personnel continued their investigation, Elias escorted Lyra to a nearby lounge area that had been cleared of all but essential personnel. "Are you all right?" he asked once they were seated. "This must be concerning." "I am unsettled," she admitted, her skin showing muted patterns of distress. "Not for my safety, but for what this means. The timing of this breach, so close to the treaty negotiations." "It's suspicious," Elias agreed. "There are factions on both sides who might prefer the Orion Treaty never come to fruition. The Purist Coalition on Xylos has been vocal in their opposition," Lyra said thoughtfully. "They believe deeper integration with other species threatens our cultural identity. And I understand there are similar groups among humans." "The Terra Supremacy Movement," Elias confirmed grimly. "They've been gaining support in some colonies, arguing that alliances with non-human species compromise Earth's autonomy and security. They're a minority, but vocal and occasionally violent." Lyra's skin darkened. Could they be working together? A human Xylan coalition against human Xylan cooperation seems paradoxical. "Extremists often find common ground in their hatred," Elias said, "and each group might see temporary collaboration as a means to their separate ends." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Director Callahan, whose expression was grave as he approached them. "Vance, cultural attaché Lyra. I've been briefed on the situation. This is concerning development. Has there been any progress in identifying the intruders?" Elias asked. "Security is still analyzing the evidence, but initial findings suggest professional work, possibly mercenaries rather than ideological actors directly. Callahan lowered his voice. There's another matter. We've received intelligence that a small vessel left the station shortly after the breach, heading for the outer system. It's possible they're rendezvousing with a larger ship beyond our immediate tracking range. They're escaping with the stolen data, Lyra concluded, her skin rippling with patterns of alarm. Possibly. Callahan turned to Elias. I've authorized a pursuit vessel, but I want you on it, Vance. You're familiar with both the treaty details and Xylan protocols. If we recover those crystals, we'll need someone who can verify their authenticity and assess what might have been compromised. Elias nodded, though he glanced at Lyra with concern. What about the security situation here? We're implementing enhanced measures throughout the diplomatic quarter, Callahan assured him. Cultural attaché Lyra will be relocated as you suggested, with appropriate security details. I should join the pursuit, Lyra said suddenly. The data crystals require specific handling. Without proper resonance attunement, they could be damaged or their data corrupted. Both men looked at her in surprise. Callahan frowned. That would be highly irregular. This could be dangerous. With respect, Director, Lyra countered, her skin showing determination. Those crystals contain sensitive information for my government. I am trained in their proper handling and authentication. Having a Xylan representative present also ensures transparency. Neither side can accuse the other of tampering with recovered evidence.